School shooter was just released from prison. I was the only survivor, and I think he wants me dead. Life's not easy when at just 16 years old, half the people you know are murdered. I was always high, driving carelessly, and skipping classes every other day. Ironically, that's what saved my life. I was cheating on my girlfriend with her best friend Joan that day. On the fateful morning I skipped all the classes, but Joan decided to go for the last period. She was the first person to find the dead and mangled bodies all around. Every single corpse was missing something: a leg, an eye, a kidney, and so on. Poor beautiful Joan didn't resist the survivor's guilt and took her own life just a few weeks later. I thought it couldn't get any worse, but I never could have guessed how horrifyingly wrong I was. My parents were desperate to give me a new start. I was only a high school sophomore and had my whole life ahead of me, so we moved across the country. I decided to seize the opportunity to really start over, stop making my parents worry, and be a good boy. I promised myself I'd be a better person. I love my parents so much, and I'd do anything for them. They had a lot to lose by moving to a new city, but they still did it for me. This was a real wake-up call to make me get rid of my toxic behavior. The most shocking thing about the shooting, and what surprised everyone the most, was the shooter's identity. Lucas Rhines was smart and nice, one of those easygoing guys that can be seen hanging out with anyone. He was never bullied, violent, or anything. He was one of the 3 most brilliant students from our year. Lucas was always involved in charity or events to help the school team. We were never close, but I would never expect that from him. The tragic explanation came a few days after the shooting. Lucas had a mental breakdown that morning after finding out that both his parents had been killed in a car crash. Due to the tragic circumstances and his usual good character, Lucas was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Then his once again exceptional behavior granted him another reduction. In the end, he served merely 5 years for 28 murders. Lucas was released last November, and one by one the survivors from our former sophomore class are being killed, and I think I'm next. The first victim was Lana Armstrong. After surviving the shooting, Lana had moved from our hometown too, but still lived in the same state. Her death made national news because of the brutality. An 8-month-old pregnant woman was found dead in her own apartment, with both her hands severed. The second survivor to die was Brandon Davies, a former football player. Brandon was run over by a semi-truck, and one of his legs was nowhere to be found. His murder didn't get a lot of media coverage, but a cousin who still lived in the area told me about it. The news mentioned that Lana's death had a ritualistic pattern, but no one connected the dots about her death being related to Brandon's, and both being related to Lucas Rhines and the shooting 5 years ago. I myself only realized it when Camilla Darwin, a girl from my school who I was friends with, was found dead, and her 2 eyes had been extracted. There was no doubt. Lucas was back to finish the job he had started. I know that 3 brutal murders should have made me panic, but I didn't worry too much about my safety because I was living over 10 states away. It would be so much easier to simply pursue closer targets, like he had been doing so far, but making this assumption was a mistake. After Camilla, Lucas came for me. I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by the horrible scratch of long nails against the metal of my doorknob. The smell of decaying flesh hit my nostrils almost simultaneously. There was no adrenaline rush in the world that could keep me from falling on the floor in a pool of my own vomit. As the 3 figures entered my room, I let out a scream I've been holding for over 5 years. Lucas was escorted by the walking, rotten corpses of a couple that had been in their 40s before dying. They hobbled unnaturally, leaving a trail of dead matter. I recognized their faces immediately because I saw them on the night before the shooting, in the car crash that killed them. Joan didn't like me to drive drunk and high, so she fought me and took the wheel. But she was inexperienced, barely starting to learn how to drive. She couldn't hit the brakes fast enough when a big truck changed lanes dangerously and cut off the car in front of us. We smashed our front bumper against their rear. We were unhurt, so I assumed the people in the other car didn't take much damage either. I was 16. I thought I was invincible. I thought death was something that only happened to other people, far from my sight, or to really old grandfathers. I told Joan we had to leave or we would be in trouble, and I saw their faces for a fraction of a second as she drove away trembling. I felt like we were in slow motion, as my senses registered everything with a sharpness they didn't usually have. The 2 of them, Mr. and Mrs. Rhines, the couple in the other car, were undoubtedly dead. I vaguely thought they would be fine, but we wouldn't, because my girl was driving her mother's car even though she still didn't have a permit. We didn't stop to help. We were scared. I was a coward. They were still alive when we left them. They could have survived if we didn't run away. Instead, a second vehicle crashed into them. It was late at night and a dark road. I only learned this part of the story after they visited me last November, and to this day, I still don't know what happened to the other driver. That night, I told Joan we'd sort things out in the morning. She was crying and obviously couldn't sleep a wink. She was a mess the next day. I tried to keep calm and rational and fix everything. I truly thought the only problem at hand was pretending that we weren't in the crash. We were getting rid of her mother's car as Lucas received the news. We were calling the insurance company, pretending that the car was stolen as he, maddened by his pain, started loading every gun in his house. I was calming Joan down and telling her we would be fine as Lucas mercilessly slaughtered half the people we knew. Joan was miserable. I was miserable too, but we still didn't know whether the people in the crash had lived or died. I know now that Joan did find out what happened way sooner than me. She had to know, and the answer was why she took her life, not the shooting. Not only the shooting, at least. She went through so much because of me. Everyone went through so much. So when Lucas and the zombies of Mr. and Mrs. Rhines entered my room, I begged for my life. I did it because I thought being killed by them wasn't enough to atone for what I've done to them. I offered to help Lucas with his plan, killing people and using their body parts to replace his parents. cutting their limbs and organs off right after death, preserving them on ice, researching old witchcraft and rituals, sewing them on his parents' decaying bodies. I've done it again and again, and now the Rhines couple is almost completely brand new. They just need new hearts to function again, almost like they never died. I offered mine for one of them, so this is goodbye.